Welcome to another exciting podcast of Royal Oak Victory Church. We're glad you've joined us. We are a community devoted to God, connected to others, and influencing our world.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see all of you out, whether you're here in house or online. It's great to have you, and I'm excited to be able to share the word with you this morning. It's kind of interesting. I don't know how many of you are on Facebook, but there's this neat little feature that I've kind of become a little bit addicted to, and it's called memories. And it's all the things that happened that you posted on that specific day years in the past, right? And for somebody like me who's been on Facebook for, I don't even want to count the number of years, memories now has value because there's lots of different things that have come up. In fact, one of them not that long ago was the fact that I had like 7 friends with birthdays all on the exact same day, which I didn't think was possible, but it was kind of interesting. But the one thing that really caught my attention was a couple of weeks ago. And there was this picture that came up that I had been tagged in from a number of years ago where I was surrounded by my friends. Now, the reason this picture caught my attention and the reason I found it interesting is because there were a number of people in that picture that I had no clue who they were. None whatsoever. I couldn't remember their names. I couldn't remember how I had come to know them. I had no idea why they were in the picture. The only reason why I knew to call them my friends is because they were in that picture. But I really had no idea who these individuals were. And isn't that so true that over the course of time, as we all know, the status of our relationships change, right? It changes with those around us. Now, that can be for a variety of different reasons. I mean, we finish school, we change jobs, maybe we move to a new community or a new city, or for many of you, you move to a new country. We get married, we grow up, we have kids. All of these things cause us to change the relationships or the effect of the relationships around us. And with each life event, really we have 2 choices. We can drift farther apart or we can come closer together. It really is just that natural part of life. And really it's a rarity. In fact, I want to kind of get an idea here, but it's a rarity that we still have friendships or relationships with people over an extended period of time. And it's even more rare that you have friendships with people that you grew up with. So I want to ask just a quick question, just a show of hands for those of you that are here in house. Those of you who are online, you can just drop an emoji in the feed. But the idea here is if you are over the age of, let's say, 25, because it's really unfair if you're still under 25. How many here over the age of 25 still have a good relationship with someone that they grew up with? Anybody? There's a few of you around the room. That's good. I must admit, as the farther time goes by, the less easy it is for me to say yes to that question. It's just the way things are. Now, the interesting thing is here we come into a year like 2020. And 2020 did something to our relationships that no other major event has done before. It affected every single relationship we had. Not just some of them, all of them. Some of our relationships grew stronger. But in talking with a lot of people, I think most of us have had at least one relationship that suffered in this past year. It is like our relationships, they suffered some sort of paralysis because of the ongoing strain of the pandemic, with its rules, with its lockdowns, with each person in each group basically deciding how much or how little they were going to follow the guidelines. Now, for some of us, we had relationships that were silenced. Our circle of influence decreased. People that we thought we were good friends with were reduced to acquaintances, or maybe they were removed from our lives altogether. Time and distance simply just drove us apart and created a separation that has not yet been corrected. Now, for some of us, we've had relationships that have been muted. We weren't able to be around these people as much as we used to be, with things like cohorts and working from home instead of in an office. With us not being able to attend church events or even church itself on a regular basis because the numbers kept changing all the time. We could meet and then we couldn't, and then we could meet but only a few people. Under all of these different restrictions and social gathering rules that got into place, really we just weren't able to meet people as much as we wanted. And so some of these relationships were just muted. It was just harder for us to connect with one another. And if we were to admit it, some of our relationships became maybe a little strained, maybe a little strange if we were to think about it. The people that were around us that we shared things in common with reacted to the pandemic in ways that we did not expect. People during the last year reacted with more passion. They reacted with more fear and maybe more conspiracy than we ever thought possible. And it created a division in the relationship that we didn't understand, and maybe today we still don't understand. Whatever your relationships look like this year, compared to what they looked like last year, really we just have to come to this understanding that 2020 took its toll. That's really the first thing we need to recognize, is that our relationships, our friendships have been affected. And again, this didn't just happen to a general group of friends. This happened inside of our marriages. This happened between parents and children. It happened between friends that we thought were really close. They were quite tight. Every relationship was affected. And I cannot think of many things that have suffered more over this past year than our relationships. But the interesting thing is if you don't stop there, if you dig a little bit deeper, this isn't a new problem. In fact, if we look, sociologists and psychologists have been tracking this trend for a number of years beyond just 2020. 30 years ago, if you were to ask the average American how many close friends, not just acquaintances, but close friends they had, people would have averaged around 6 close friends. By 2016, this had dropped down to 2. And by 2018, before any of this COVID stuff, it had dropped down to 1. Now, there's a number of reasons for this. I mean, they look into this and they go, well, things like answering machines, voicemail. We don't answer the phone the way we used to, right? I mean, for those of you that aren't familiar with this, you actually had to pick up the phone to find out who was calling you. Right? We have these things called attached garages. We drive in, close the door, and we ignore everybody around us. We have longer working hours, and of course social media that makes us think that we have way more friends than we actually do. And 2020 largely limited us to our homes. It kept us confined or restrained, and we were removed from society. And so I want to pause just for a moment here, to pause for a second. And I want each of us to take a moment, and I want you to think of who you would consider to be your closest friends right now in this moment. Now, if you're married, you cannot pick your spouse. But I want you to think of anyone else, the closest people to you. How many people can you name? How many people that at this point in time, you know you could call at 2 a.m. if there was an emergency? Who is it? Who's on your list? I can tell you that right now, my list today is smaller than it was a year ago. And if we listen to the news, we realize that this has created a major health concern, a major mental health concern in our society. Governments are pouring massive amounts of money into this. I found it interesting. I was telling the staff this week that the Center for Disease Control, the CDC in Atlanta, just recently updated their coronavirus guidance. So with all of the normal stuff, the hand sanitizer, the masks, the social distancing, blah, 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 stuff we've got used to, they have now added phone a friend as one of their guidance pieces for coronavirus. For those of us who have an understanding of the Bible, this really shouldn't come as any surprise. God himself said in Genesis 2:18, it is not good for man to be alone. And yet, this is where we find ourselves. We are in a relational desert. And so that's really why we have decided to look at this topic. And so if you were with us last week, you'll know that we started a brand new series called Vital Signs. I can't think of a better topic for a series because really that's what we're looking at, is how our lives, our very vitals, right, if we think about it from a medical perspective, have been affected. Pastor Dave introduced us to this series last week. But if we look at relationships, I can't think of an area in our life right now that is in more need of a doctor, a healer, and really a savior. Somebody that can guide us out of poverty, that can guide us out of this desert, and potentially save us from flatlining in this area of our life. Because if we see clearly 2020 as a paralysis, we then need to move towards healing and wholeness. We need to fix the problem. Now, for each of us, the how is going to be largely determined by our own circumstances. So this morning, rather than trying to explain the how, whether that's Zoom or face-to-face or whatever that looks like for each of you, I want us to focus on instead the why. Because if we don't see the whole point of this thing, if we don't see the reason why, if we don't see the need and the value that is placed in relationship, we will never get to the how. We will never do the hard work of getting into relationship with one another. If we don't see that real, loving, truth-filled, vulnerable relationships are important, we will never correct the problem. And the reality is that I cannot be who I was created to be without people around me. So I want all of you, if you're in-house here, I want you to turn to the person beside you and say, I'm glad you're here today. Now, I'm not going to leave you online folks out either, because I'm glad that you're here too. So make sure that you drop a comment in the feed to let us know that you're here today. Because it's important that we understand that we are all part of this amazing thing called relationship. And really, when we look at the Bible in its entirety, that is one of the main themes of the Bible itself, is this idea of relationship and the value that we have behind this. What it really means is it comes down to two distinct viewpoints, and that's what I want to spend my time on this morning, is looking at each of these. And really, the reason, like I said, the why behind getting into relationship with one another. So the first viewpoint that we have to have is internal. It's my character. I have to look at my character. Because being in relationship teaches us about ourselves. It teaches us what we want to be like and who we don't want to be like. It maybe teaches us what we want to do with our lives. Maybe it helps us evaluate what we're good at and what we're not good at. And for many of us, if not all of us, it teaches us how to love and to be loved. And whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or not, those same sociologists that talked about the fact that we've gone from 6 close friends down to 1 close friend outline something very interesting, and that is that we are influenced by those around us. Now, that shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us. But what I found very interesting is they said that really we are a culmination or an average of our 5 closest friends. So if you think about the 5 people that you're closest to, and this time you can include your spouse, really, what does that mean? It means that in every aspect of your life, you're somewhere in the middle. You're somewhere on the average. Chances are, if you were to look at your 5 closest friends and you were to look at it financially, you're not going to be the richest person in your group. You're probably not going to be the poorest person in your group. You're going to fall somewhere in the middle. If you are somebody that enjoys hanging out on a Saturday night, or maybe you're the other way around, maybe you enjoy staying in and playing a board game, there's a good chance that 4 out of 5 of your closest friends would pick the exact same thing that you would want to do on a Saturday night. And really where this comes down to the importance of it is if you really desire to pursue God, 4 out of 5 people that you surround yourself should be doing the same thing. That means if you are wholeheartedly 100% all in with God, there is a very, very high chance that those you're surrounding yourself with are pursuing God as well. Because whether we like it or not, we are the average of our 5 closest friends. I mean, it makes sense. We like to be around them. We share things in common with them. And so we learn from them. Now, when I was a lot younger and Cochrane was a lot smaller, I grew up in Cochrane, my friends and I would engage in a game called car tag. Now, I have to be very careful, and I'm very cautious, I have to admit, about sharing this story, because there's a very good chance my parents are watching online right now. So I'm right now going to plead the statute of limitations. This was a very, very long time ago. Car tag, as it sounds, involved us driving around town after dark, playing tag with our vehicles. Now, we were smart enough to not actually touch our vehicles together, even though most of our vehicles were worth about $200 or $300. It wouldn't have mattered that much. But really, the idea behind the game was that you had to corner or close in one of your friend's vehicles, if you were the person that was it, so that they could not get out. Whether that was a parking spot, a driveway, a parking lot, as long as you could corner them, they became the one tagged. Now, of course, this was very interesting because there was about 5 or 6 of us that were playing this, and this is before cell phones. So really, you had no idea who was it. I'm really not sure who came up with this game. I can tell you right now, I didn't come up with this game. But if we are the average of our 5 closest friends, I can tell you right now, the reason I played that game was because of my friends. I would have never thought of that myself. Believe me, Mom and Dad, I would have never thought of that myself. Because whether it's good or bad, we are affected by the people around us. Andy Stanley, the author and pastor, says it like this: your friends will always determine the quality and direction of your life. And Proverbs 13:20 says it like this: whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. And when it comes to car tag, I'm just going to leave that verse where it is. Now, in light of our current circumstances, the question then becomes, if I am not in relationship with others, how do I become who I'm intended to be? How do we learn? How do we grow? How do we survive in isolation? Well, the answer is that we don't. Relationships, the friendships that we have are that important. It is why Solomon, who's considered to be one of the wisest, if not the wisest man to ever live, when he penned the book of Proverbs, spent so much time talking about our relationships, our friendships with one another. It is that vital. And so I want to dig into this just a little bit further. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. I'm going to be reading out of the New Living Translation for those of you that are following along in an app and you want to be in the same version as I am. Now, it's interesting here in Hebrews chapter 10, the author is encouraging the believers to persevere. And not just that, to persevere in their faith, no matter what circumstances they are facing. Does that sound familiar to any of us today? The need for us to persevere. And here, as part of this exhortation, he outlines the importance and value of relationship as part of that perseverance. And so we pick it up in verse 24. The author writes this. It says, "Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." And here, when we're looking at our character, we see in these verses there are 2 quick things that we need to evaluate to fix this very problem. To fix the problem of us not being in relationship or our relationships being silenced or muted or have been strained. And the first thing is that we need to stop and think. to stop and think. The author tells us this: think of ways to motivate one another. This means we need to stop thinking so much about ourselves and begin thinking about those that are around us. And I know I have been very guilty of this over the last year. But we have to stop for a moment. We have to stop pitying what we have lost. We have to stop focusing on our isolation. We have to stop being angry over the current state of events. Now, don't get me wrong. There are things to be upset about, and there are things to grieve. But when we get locked up in ourselves like this, we miss out on having others engaged in our lives. We need people speaking truth into our situations. We need people who are going to challenge our perceptions so that we can have a clearer and deeper faith. We need people encouraging us when we are down. We need people praying for us and with us in the midst of this season. And sometimes we just need people to laugh with us, because this year has been weird, it has been silly, it has been unbelievable, and sometimes we just need to laugh. And that's where the value of relationship lies. If we think we're going to be able to do this alone, we're going to be setting ourselves up for disappointment and failure. Because when we are alone, that is when the enemy can creep in. That is when the enemy can speak his lies. And that's a dangerous place to be in. But sometimes, really what this means is that it requires of us to put ourselves into the lives of the friends that are around us. And it requires them to insert themselves into our lives, because I know I can be my own worst enemy. I can get focused on things around the house or my family or my situation, and I think I'm completely fine until I get that phone call from a dear friend who says, "Are you fine?" And I can't answer yes. So I want to challenge all of us today to stop, to think, to find ways that we can invite others into our lives and to interject ourselves into the lives of our friends. We may not be able to do a lot of face-to-face right now, but that is not an excuse. When the verse challenges us to stop and think, we need to do that. We need to stop and to think, to get creative, to find ways that we can build and strengthen our relationships right now, our relationships with each other and our relationship with God. And that leads me to the second thing we see in these two verses in Hebrews, and that is no more neglecting. No more neglecting. You see, in our current environment, it has never been easier to neglect those around us. We have become insular as we have been forced out of our routines, out of our rhythms, out of our comfort zones. And all of this has caused us to change our focus to primarily on ourselves. But the author of Hebrews says that we cannot neglect meeting together. We can't do it. It doesn't matter what's going on. We cannot neglect getting together. And the interesting thing is, this phrase actually means to meet physically with spiritual purpose. In other words, with time and intentionality, we need to find ways to urge one another deeper into relationship with Jesus. And that can only be done if we stop neglecting one another. Instead, we have to start making a concerted effort to engage with those around us. I mean, we have so much more than we've ever had in terms of the ability to connect. And it may be different, but it is a tool that we can use. Just because we can't necessarily get together in a room face to face doesn't mean we can't be face to face. I heard Craig Groeschel say it this week. He said, "I encourage you to meet face to face, not thumb to thumb." And what he means by that is make a phone call instead of texting someone. Go deeper. Really, if you think about every aspect of your life, it can be stirred up when we no longer neglect one another. Do you want a better marriage? Do you want to be more stable financially? Do you want to be stronger spiritually? Do you want to be in better shape? All of these things are largely driven by those that are around us. And more than that, when we think about the fruits of the Spirit and the fruits of an outcome of a relationship with Jesus Christ, a lot of the improvements, the benefits, the strength that we gain in life is based on the depth of our relationship with Jesus Christ. If we are to learn from 2020, we have to shift our viewpoint. We have to shift it from our character, from my character, and how it gets developed. And we have to start including the people around us. We have to begin to surround ourselves with the right people. As I said earlier, we cannot learn, we cannot grow, and we cannot heal in isolation. The second viewpoint we need to keep in front of us is not only my character, but his character. From the start of Genesis to the end of Revelation, every book of the Bible, God outlines the need, the value of relationship. We see stories of relationship that bring life and light, and we see tragic and heartbreaking stories that teach us things about what it means to be in friendship, what it means to be in relationship. We have stories like Abraham and Isaac, father and son, Ruth and Naomi, right? A mother and a daughter-in-law, David and Jonathan, the best of friends, Mordecai and his niece Esther. We have Jacob and Esau, brothers, and then my favorite, we have Paul and Barnabas, the dearest of friends that rally each other and encourage each other. Even Jesus himself prioritized relationship, calling his disciples not just to observe me, but to follow me. And in some of his final acts on earth, we see him enjoying a meal together with those that are closest to him. In every story, in every relationship, we are given the understanding that God values relationship. He values relationship between us. He values every aspect. And then he provides the wisdom and direction, the love and the correction, the grace and the forgiveness for us to be able to make relationships even work. Jesus taught as much in John 15. When he said this, he said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, you may ask for whatever you want and it will be granted. When you produce fruit, you are my true disciples, and this brings great glory to my Father. I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you these things so that you may be filled with joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you." And then here in verse 13, he says, "There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." And so we see throughout Jesus' life that not only did he share in relationship, not only did he teach in relationship, but his very actions showed relationship, the depth, the desire to be in relationship with each and every one of us. And so for us, one of the things we have to evaluate isn't just our relationship with one another, not just our friendships, not just our marriages, not just the relationship we have with our kids or our coworkers. We need to evaluate the depth of our relationship with Jesus. We have to decide if we have gone deeper with him over this past year or whether we've drifted apart. And for those of you that maybe have never had a relationship with Jesus, that has to become your starting point. That really has to be where it all begins, because when we look at the value of relationship, you can't learn, you can't grow, you can't heal, you can't love without understanding what all that is in the first place. And all of that is based in that relationship with Jesus Christ. And so one of the things that we do here as a church is we want to help you on that journey. Now, whether you're already on that journey, we're here to help. But for those of you that maybe have never accepted Jesus, if you want to know more, if you want to make a decision today to accept Jesus into your life, we have the ability to do so. You got to love technology. All you have to do is text the word NEXT to the number on the screen, and we will reach out to you this week. And we will connect with you, and we will pray with you, and we will share with you the amazing value that there is in the relationship with Jesus Christ. And the amazing thing is, it is simple. Romans says that all we have to do is confess with our mouth and believe that he is Lord. It's so simple. And yet in that relationship, we can see so much more, even into the relationships we have with those that are around us. You see, in life, we can be in poverty in one of three areas. One is physical. I think we all understand what physical poverty looks like. We can also be in relational poverty, and really that's what we want to avoid today, and that's what we're trying to improve today, is to try and remove ourselves from relational poverty. But the third type of poverty is probably the most devastating, and that is spiritual poverty. And the only way to deal with that type of poverty is in relationship with Jesus Christ. It is impossible. It is absolutely impossible to remove ourselves from this type of bankruptcy without a connection to the very source of life, to the vine and the branches, to the God of the universe. And just as 2020 has caused us to reflect and evaluate, to amend our broken relationships, I think for many of us, we need to do the same thing with our relationship with him. With all of our relationships. Like I said, some have improved, but many have suffered. And as we embark upon this new year, it becomes imperative that we do whatever we can to ensure the relationships, both with those around us and with Jesus, are strong. That is where we find the value. That is why we do what we do. That's why we have to do the hard work that is friendship. King Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 4, 9-12, he said, 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Likewise, 2 people lying close together can keep each other warm, but how can one be warm alone? A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but 2 can stand back to back and conquer. 3 are even better, for a 3-braided cord is not easily broken. To repeat what I said earlier, the reality is that I cannot be who I was created to be without people around me. Gene Roddenberry, who's the creator of Star Trek, and I'm going to show kind of my geek side here, but he said it like this. He said, in a very real sense, we are all aliens on a strange planet. He said, we spend most of our lives reaching out and trying to communicate. If during our whole lifetime we could reach out and really communicate with just 2 people, we are indeed very fortunate. Connection, community, relationship, whatever that looks like, really is foundational. It is fundamental to us as human beings. It is a requirement of our existence. And so in this year, I want to pray over us. Can you stand with me this morning? I want to pray over each and every one of us, that we can do what is necessary to make the hard work, to make the intentional effort, to do all that we can, to fight for what we have, and to fight for what we lost. Because one of the things, and we heard it at the crossover service, I truly believe that we can do what is necessary to make 2021 the best year we have ever had. But it requires, as Pastor Dave said last week, us moving beyond 2020 and everything that it threw at us, and instead focusing on what God has to say through us and over our lives. And one of those ways that we can begin to move forward is in our relationships. Our relationship with Him has to be strong. It has to be foundational. But it's just as true of our relationships with one another. And for me, I know this week has been a convicting week, even as I have prepared this sermon, about the necessity for me to reach out to people that I have lost touch with. Even this morning, I was praying, and God dropped an individual into my heart and said, you need to reach out to this person. And I went, okay, and I started flipping through my text messages. And I realized that we haven't talked since October. This is somebody that I would consider to be a close friend. And so I want to pray over all of us, like I said, that we fight for what's important. We do what is necessary to build our relationships back up so that we can move into 2021 with success. Let's pray. God, I want to thank you so much, God, for who you are. I want to thank you that you have revealed yourself to us. And even more than that, God, you have revealed so clearly to us your desire and our need for relationship. God, I pray that in every way, God, we would realize that the people around us, those that we truly value and that we truly love, God, can be our biggest supporters. And God, I pray that we would do what is necessary. We would fight over this year. We would fight for these relationships. One of the things I felt this morning, even in prayer, is that there are some here today that are living in a sense of brokenness because of the relationships in their lives that have fallen apart. I felt very clearly that God was saying He wants to repair and restore those relationships this year, but that it's going to require effort. It's going to require work. It's not just going to come together naturally, but if we take that first step, He is faithful to walk us through reconciliation, to repair, to build up that relationship and to remove that brokenness from our lives. And so God, I pray for those individuals today that are feeling that sense of brokenness. God, that you would pour love and care and peace and wisdom into their lives so that they can clearly see the steps that they can take, the way that they can fight for those relationships this year. Whether that's with a dear friend, God, whether that's with a child and a parent relationship, or God, whether that's inside of a marriage. God, that this year would be a year of blessing and restoration. In Jesus' name, amen.